This is not a political commentary. We're not a political show. We don't talk about it on TV. We don't talk about it on radio. We are a gospel-driven show, which is why I think it's important as we go about the business of evangelizing to people that we are mindful of the world's attitude toward the current occupant of the White House. I want people to hear about Jesus. I want people to hear about what he's done for us on the cross. I want them to see Jesus as the amazing God that he is, that they would run to him for safety, that he would be their cleft in the rock, that they would escape the wrath that is to come, see him as the ark of their salvation. That's what we want. And it's my experience that when you're engaging with somebody on that subject, if you bring in the idea or talk about our current president, look out, you're putting up a pretty big roadblock. I'm not saying vote for him or not. That's not my point at all. I'm just saying, let's look at the reality. There's a whole lot of lost people that really hate Donald Trump. And if you bring him up, they might just hate you and they just might hate your message. We want them to have a stumbling block, but we want it to be Jesus and not a politician. Case in point, Jenna, the Presbyterian at UGA, I merely mentioned 2 words, White House. Watch Jenna's face. I'm not talking about politics. I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I merely mentioned the White House. And Jenna was like, ooh. And that is why I would encourage you, talk about the president as you choose, but please, in the context especially of evangelism, talk about him very wisely. Is what I'm saying true?
I have no way of knowing that.
Fair enough. All right, do you think that there could be a way to know it?
If you show me, then sure, but I sincerely doubt it.
All right. If I said to you, the president lives in the White House, and I was going to prove it to you, all right? This isn't a political thing. I'm just using this as an illustration. If I said the president lives in the White House,
right,
I could take you to the White House lawn, look in the windows, and when you saw the president in there with his robe and slippers having breakfast, you would conclude, yeah, the guy lives here.
Yeah.
I've shown you that the president lives in the White House by bringing you to the White House and showing you the president lives there. I believe the Bible is axiomatic. It's self-proving. If you look at it, you can only have one conclusion. God wrote a book. And here's how I would lay that out for you. And I'm truly grateful that you've asked, so thank you for your indulging me on this. Do you remember the first story in the Bible about Adam and Eve?
Yes.
There was a river, 2 trees, and they were 2 naked vegetarians, right? Sure. And they were, because they didn't understand shame, because everything was perfect. But God said, one rule, don't eat that fruit. She ate the fruit. He was with, the whole world fell into sin, okay?
All right.
Do you remember what happened immediately after they fell into sin?
No.
They realized they were naked and they were ashamed. So they tried to cover themselves up with fig leaves. But God did something really radical. The first time an animal was killed, God killed an animal for skins to cover up the human shame. Okay?
Okay.
That's a fuzzy picture of something. All right? Do you remember the story of Abraham and Isaac? Remember this one?
Yes.
God tells Abraham to kill his son. Kind of a wild story, right?
Right.
So he takes Isaac to go walking up a hill, and on his way, the son is carrying the wood for the sacrifice, and the son asks, Father, where's the lamb? And Abraham says, God will provide the lamb. And just as Abraham is prepared to kill his only begotten son, God says, stop. And there's no lamb provided, but there was a ram in the thicket that God provided, as if to suspend the tension about the lamb that was going to be provided by God. The next time we visit that very same mountain, a beloved father killed his beloved son. That's the same hill on which God the Father killed Jesus Christ on your behalf. Because Abraham and Isaac, that was a fuzzy picture of the good news of the gospel. There were lamb sacrifices all throughout the Old Testament. constantly killing lambs, the shedding of blood, not for the forgiveness, but for the covering of sins. And every time a lamb's blood was shed, it was to point toward a need for a greater lamb sacrifice. Here's a quote from the Bible. I'm paraphrasing. All right? There was a man who was so beaten, we couldn't even tell he was a human being. And like a lamb that was led to the slaughter, we thought it was for his sins, but it was actually for the sins of his people. Do you know what book of the Bible that comes from?
No.
Isaiah. That was written 700 years before John the Baptist pointed at Jesus and said, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." All of those Old Testament stories about death and blood being shed for the covering of sins were all pointing to Jesus Christ. There's one story in the Bible. It's the story of redemption of Jesus Christ. That book was written over the course of 1,400 years by over 40 different authors, 66 books, one story. Watch C-SPAN. Congress can't agree on everything. These writers agreed on one thing, that Jesus Christ, God's Son, died for sinners. I would suggest to you, Jenna, that's the proof that the Bible is supernatural. Men wouldn't concoct that story. Every other religion is about works, about doing stuff to appease the wrath of God. This message that I'm sharing with you today announces grace, grace, God's grace. He will forgive you completely if you put your trust in His Son. This is the good news of the gospel. It is the only story like it, and the Bible proves that it's true. There, I just preached at you.
All right.
Give me your response.
It's a lot to respond to.
Go ahead.
You said every other religion on earth is about appeasing the wrath of God, but there are hundreds of religions that don't have a God at all. There's 1,000 different ways to live a good life, and the fact that you're saying that there's the one God and the only way to make it to heaven is to believe in Him and Him alone and to do everything He wants you to do it's closed-minded in terms of what other people's life experience and beliefs are. I mean, the fact that you can only make it to heaven and then otherwise you'll be tortured for eternity is the only way to make it to heaven and not be tortured for eternity is to somehow know about the Bible, and to believe in it above what you've been raised to think, or if it's the first religion you've ever encountered, to somehow know that it should be true. It's not a fair burden of proof. You're saying that the Bible is, its own proof, but that's not how proof works. It has to be some kind of outside evidence. You were asking for a scientist earlier, and I'm sure
you want a scientific proof.
I don't. I want something anything that isn't from its own text. One text cannot prove that itself is true.
Sure it can. Just like I can show you the president lives in the White House by taking you to the White House. If I shared a book with you, you'd have to have some criteria to conclude whether that book is speaking the truth or not. The Bible proves itself to be true.